One Saturday morning, I was at home and my phone rang. And I'll never forget the words, "Baghdad will see you now."
What's your immediate reaction?
An element of terror.
In the autumn of 1990, Saddam Hussein stunned the West by sending Iraqi tanks to occupy neighbouring Kuwait. He was a man with an enormous amount of blood on his hands, unpredictable, violent, ruthless.
My office in Baghdad had no idea where we were.
I think at one stage he was strip searched.
My colleague was pretty roughly handled. You know, we're walking into the unknown.
I think I'm right in saying you haven't watched this back.
I've never seen this. I never associated Saddam with smiling. And in the end, it was going to end as it was going to end.
When you look back on it all now, with all this history that's unfolded, what do you think when you reflect on it?
I wonder whether a chance may have been missed to change that outcome.
These are the remarkable stories from journalists who found themselves at the heart of events so momentous they were no longer just capturing the news, but reporting history. Sir Trevor, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
To begin with, I want to take us back to the beginning of August 1990.
Iraq crushes Kuwait, its tanks seal the capital. Mr. Bush and Mrs. Thatcher call for collective action against Iraq.
Kuwait's leader, the Emir, escaped by helicopters. His palace was attacked. The invasion has been condemned around the world.
We need to talk about Saddam himself, because one thing we do need to understand at the beginning of the story is what a truly terrible dictator he was, and he gassed the Kurds in Halabja. He was a man with an enormous amount of blood on his hands, unpredictable, dangerous, violent, ruthless. You're one of our principal newsreaders at the time. How did it come to the idea that you are interviewing him? When was it first talked about? How did you go about doing it?
Well, I'm not too sure there was ever a formed idea that I would go and do the interview. But I discovered that there was an Iraqi cultural office in Tottenham Court Road in London. And I resolved to make my first call in the morning there, that office. And then I would walk to ITN, which wasn't very far. A rather nice, charming, young Iraqi diplomat ran that office. I'd go in and said, Niall Hassan was his name. How are things these days? How's the war going? Oh, his table was full of papers, not in any orderly fashion. And I had asked whether there was any possibility of trying to get to Baghdad to see the president. And he agreed to try to help me to do this. He would shuffle the papers on his desk and say, I had a message from Baghdad a few days ago, but I'll be damned if I can find it anywhere. And yet every morning I went into that office looking for this bit of paper from Baghdad. And he smoked a lot. There were 2 televisions blaring all around. And some of his people bringing in coffee cups but never any word about Baghdad. And I'm not too sure that ever in those 20 or 30 days I did that every morning, I ever got an affirmative word about the possibility of meeting the president. And then one Saturday morning I was at home and my phone rang. And I'll never forget the words because they were significant. He said, Trevor, Baghdad will see you now. And I tried to make a joke of it. And I said, Niall, just the president will do, not the entire city.
What's your immediate reaction when he says Baghdad will see you now? Sort of elation or terror or a bit of both?
It's a strange thing about journalism. That's what you do. You hear the words Baghdad will see you now, and you stupidly start packing. And once you got there, the story became slightly more complicated. I spent several days at the Ministry of Information until one afternoon, one of the press officers said to me, well, you've been here a week now and nothing has happened. I said, tell me. I've been here a week and nothing has happened. And after about 2 or 3 days, a call came and said there's some cars outside. There was a major next to the driver. Driver was a private. And I tried my best to ask a very simple question. Could you explain where you're taking us? Where are we going? Are we going to do the interview this evening? Might it be tomorrow? Where are we going? And we turned up early evening and met by a very nice guy who came out and said, welcome. And I said, where are we? Oh, he said, one of the president's palaces. And I said, oh, that's very nice. And then he said, what would you like for breakfast? So I said, you mean dinner? And he said, no, I mean breakfast. And that immediate, I looked around at my colleagues and I said, you know what this means, guys? We're staying the night.
You are in there, as you said, staying a night in some presidential palace. You don't know where you are. You don't know whether you're going to do the interview. And I don't want to sort of exaggerate the threat, but you truthfully don't know.
No mobile phones.
No mobile phones.
My office in Baghdad had no idea where we were.
And you can't be absolutely certain you're ever going to get out again. I mean, who knows? What a very unpredictable man. What's going through your mind when you were spending the night in the palace?
The first thing, an element of terror. I mean, it's the unpredictability of it. There's no format, there's no formula. There was even a point where they said, I'm not too sure you can take your cameras with you. And I said, what? But we're going to do a television interview. What do you mean you can't take your cameras? And they would all put these problems up to us without any answers. And we never knew from one moment to another what was going to happen.
Well, I want to pick up on that, but just before I do, you obviously have arrived for ITN in Baghdad and you set up the coming interview like this. Let's just take a listen.
Good evening from Baghdad. Is the Gulf tonight on the brink of war, or is there still time for diplomacy? Ever since President Saddam Hussein sent his troops across the border into Kuwait, this city has become the focus of international attention and concern. Everything the president says is closely scrutinized for clues about his ultimate aims and intentions. I'm here for the first ever British interview with President Saddam Hussein. The interview will be shown as recorded. There'll be no restrictions on what I can ask the president.
Going forward to the moment you do get the interview and you're sitting in front of him, maybe you could talk us through that. I mean, presumably the security is paranoid, and as you get there, what's going through your mind as you're finally sitting down with this guy who much of the international community literally thinks of as a monster?
We've got this arrangement, so-called, that the interview will be free-flowing. There'll be no restrictions on what we may ask. And after this has been recorded, there'd be no attempt by the Iraqis to tamper with it in any way. And I think I'm right in saying that the interview was broadcast on Iraqi television. So that's quite
well, an interview that no Iraqi journalist would ever dare to ask any of the questions you'd ask, right?
You know, we're walking into the unknown. When we actually turned up at where the interview was likely to happen, there was a marked difference. The security had just quantified, and my colleague, was pretty roughly handled. My notes and pens and so on were temporarily taken away.
I think at one stage you were strip searched, I think I'm right in saying. So the security has been kind of intense. You're sitting down with a man who has very rarely ever been subjected to this kind of interview and certainly wouldn't be in Iraq. And, you've got the audience back home to think about. That's about intellectually as complicated a thing as somebody in your position has to do. And I'd love to talk about how you approached the interview and your first question. But let's just hear the first question and then maybe we can talk about it.
Mr. President, the invasion of a neighboring country with such calculated force and brutality is a very un-Arab thing to do, isn't it?
هل هو إنجليزي مثلا؟
Would it be an English thing then, for instance?
إذا كان غير عربي.
If it's not an Arab thing to do, would it be a British way?
I don't think it would be a British way, Mr. President, but I'm asking whether it's not an un-Arab thing to do.
لنتفق على أنه.
Let's agree that any aggressive act or any act of aggression is not any of our traits. It's not characteristic of us, but it is characteristic of us to repel aggression. What happened was that the ruling family in Kuwait conspired against us.
But, Mr. President, the fact is that before August the 2nd, Kuwait was an independent country and a member of the United Nations.
تماما نحن لا ننكر هذا الجانب.
That's right. We do not deny this part. Was it legal for this part of Iraq to have been severed from Iraq in 1913? The severing of Kuwait was not done in any legal way, but it was done according with the law that says might is right.
I think I'm right in saying you haven't watched this back since it was.
I've never seen this.
It's quite a high-stakes way to begin an interview
It
with the
was quite
world's
a high-
most notorious
I have
dictator.
probably learned my lesson now, and if I had to do this again, I'd find other words.
But why would you? Because, I mean, that strikes me as quite a bold opening.
Yeah. The comment about an un-Arab thing to do is a particularly biting bit of commentary to somebody like Saddam Hussein, because it is one of the highest kind of insults to somebody who is not only a president, but who thinks himself as a true nationalist. And the fact that he's notorious and has done all these things is no real reason not to use that question. But I still cringe when I listen to it.
Let's just get into some of the chunk of one of the main chunks of the interview.
Mr. President, when your troops invaded Kuwait, went into Kuwait, did you think that the Americans would stand idly by and do nothing?
It didn't occur to us to begin with. The first question in our minds was whether we were right or wrong in this particular act.
But now, Mr. President, as a result of that action, you have the world uniquely ranged against you. Even your friends, the Soviets and the French, they say you must get out of Kuwait.
We respect the view of anybody who may have a view on the subject of Kuwait, because the issue of Kuwait is a complicated one. But to say that the world is unified or united against Iraq is indeed not a correct thing. Let me give you another example. When Israel occupied Palestine, how many countries of the world supported these Israeli decisions?
Not many countries of the world support it.
But nothing happened. Isn't there an irony there? Double standards clearly there in the behavior towards the Arabs and towards Muslims?
But surely, Mr. President, what the Israelis did is no measure of what a country like Iraq should do. And the fact is that the world now says that you must leave Kuwait. Are you prepared to do that? Will you do that?
We are ready to enter into a deep dialogue as to the requirements for security in our region.
He seems at this stage of the interview, maybe less so at the end, quite relaxed. I mean, of course, he's used to totally dominating his surroundings and everyone being terrified of him.
You're absolutely right. I thought he was on much more comfortable ground. And he was venturing into the philosophical reasons about what is behind Iraqi thinking. And I was really, really surprised that he got into the Israel-Palestine issue. So I was saying you'd excite the Americans and everybody else to get into this. And he's saying, but what's happening in the Middle East is already happening and nobody seems to be terribly excited, really.
As we've discussed, you've gone in quite boldly by suggesting it's an un-Arab thing to do, knowing that might be something that really riles him and not being quite sure how he's going to respond to that. He doesn't walk out or anything. You know you've got to get to the bit he might really walk out at, but you know you must ask, which is about alleged atrocities in Kuwait. And let's just hear that section of the interview, and then I'd love to ask you about it.
Mr. President, I'd like to move the discussion on a little bit. How can you justify the atrocities committed by Iraqi troops in Kuwait in your name?
هل اطلعت على جانب منها؟
Have you seen these atrocities yourself or any of them?
I have not seen these, but may I quote you some of the reports, Mr. President? One report speaks of scores of people being tortured and hanged at Kuwait University for opposing the annexation of their country. Another report speaks of 15-year-old boys being shot. An American woman married to a Kuwaiti talks about a pregnant woman being disemboweled. These reports have been coming out of Kuwait for some time. Do you know about these reports? Do they worry you? Have you heard about them?
من المؤكد بأنني لم أسمع بمثل هذه الأعمال.
What is certain is that I have not heard of any such acts being done.
يعني ممكن مثل ما
It is possible, of course, that in the same way as the Western media is trying to fill the minds of people everywhere daily with lies about the situation, then by the same notion, it is possible also that some false report may come out of Kuwait claiming or alleging the sort of things being done that you have described.
Mr. President, Mrs. Thatcher of Great Britain says that even if you withdraw from Kuwait, you must be made to pay compensation for the damage that you have caused there. Do you take that warning seriously? She says you have been warned.
تقول السيدة تاتشر هذا الكلام.
Any case, when Mrs. Thatcher says anything like this seriously, then of course it has to be taken seriously. Has she consulted with the world, which she describes as being against us?
There's a lot of support in the world for that view.
لا.
No, that's not the case.
رجل
You are a man in a very special position in the service of truth. I'm an Arab
في أوساط
and a Muslim,
الإدارة البريطانية لا يحترمون هذا الوصف.
and maybe there are people in the British administration who disdain this description. But I am well informed.
One thing that intrigues me about this interview as I watch it again is that this does strike me as relatively quite a sophisticated performance by somebody who's used to never being told no, never being given honest advice.
There was a flicker of occasional smile there, which did surprise me. I never associated Saddam with smiling, and I was clearly wrong. He was a much smoother operator than I thought. And looking at it now, because I haven't scrutinized it very much before, I am surprised. Don't forget, this is a man who inspired such fear in the country.
He's got a whole bunch of his officials, cabinet in the room watching this interview,
Yeah.
right? Many of them will never have seen their president being grilled before by anyone, let alone like this. So what do you think is going through their minds when they're listening to you asking these questions?
Yeah, they were surprised. I met one man many, many years later in London. He'd been my interpreter. He said we were very tough. But I said the president seems, accepted it well and tried to hit back where he could.
You've done this interview. You've obviously thought a huge amount about the interview before you've done it. You come up to the final question. Let's just hear it, and then I'd love to talk about what your thinking on the final question was.
From what you said this evening, you have no intentions of withdrawing your troops from Kuwait. Does that mean that this region is on the brink of another devastating war?
I talked about the importance of the comprehensive approach to all issues in the region, the approach of dialogue replacing the approach of the arms. If all parties concerned were to remember the importance of these facts and sat together on around one table, we are confident that these parties will reach serious and deep solutions to all the issues. The region and its peoples will have become happy.
ونكون قدمنا خدمة كبيرة للسلام العالمي.
And we will have done international peace a great service.
الله يجنبنا الحروب والحرب وإلاتها. ويجنب البشرية.
May God spare us wars and the scourge of wars, and may God spare all mankind the calamities of war.
Mr. President, thank you.
سيادة الرئيس شكرا جزيلا على
أنا مسرور
I'm happy to have had this
أشكركم حقا.
dialogue with you. I thank you, truly.
So there are several things that absolutely intrigue me about that. One is that the whole world thinks a war is about to happen, as you put him, but he doesn't seem to think so.
Here the interview turns the corner. And I think, in broad philosophical terms, he probably gets away with it because of the way he presents it as the final conclusion, and because of the question that I asked about the possibility of eternal war. And he says, it's probably time now for everybody to get together and talk about peace. And most extraordinary.
I'm so interested to hear what happens next, but you did file a report about it, so let's just have a look at what you filed once you'd got to Jordan, having left Iraq.
After the interview, President Saddam took me by the arm, clearly desperate to say more than he'd done in the previous hour and a half. We paced the room back and forth for the best part of 30 minutes with his interpreter. His subject was Kuwait, and how despised the Kuwaiti royal family were for their wealth, and how badly they treated their people. The determined and anxious manner in which he did this was as significant as what he said. The president wanted the world to understand what Iraq had done. During the interview, if tired and stressed, the flickering eyelid showed that, he'd seemed moderately assured. His remarks about Mrs. Thatcher and President Bush were derogatory in an almost amusing way. He was as candid as perhaps only a self-confident man can be, freely admitting that stories of atrocities in Kuwait had been enhanced by the sealing off of the country. But the key to what he told me is that Iraq, like the president himself, wants to talk. During the interview, the president said the kind of things which would go down well in some parts of the Arab world, like here in Jordan. The impression I gained from talking to him is that President Saddam Hussein remains genuinely puzzled about world condemnation of Iraq's actions and would like to talk himself out of the Gulf crisis. But the president and most of his countrymen are bracing themselves for the possibility of another devastating war. Trevor McDonald, ITN, Amman.
So when you look back on it now, what do you make of Saddam's reaction, sort of pacing you up and down? I'm intrigued to know what's going through your mind at this point. You know, you've already sat there for an hour and a half.
How soon can I get out of here?
How soon can I? But he's marching you up and down. Are you at this point thinking he's a bit desperate to avoid this war?
Maybe he was. I mean, I think he was not unaware of what Iraq's position was. And in the end, it was going to end as it was going to end. He had to make the noises which he thought were necessary to placate international political opinion. And if that meant appearing to hold out the olive branch with one half a hand, he'll do that.
I've got one final question to ask you, but before that, I think we should, for those who don't remember it, weren't alive at the time, didn't witness it, or even for those who did, I think it's worth looking at how it all ended and then maybe asking you to reflect back on this very strange event that you were at the heart of.
For 3 decades, he ruled Iraq with an iron fist. Now his hands are manacled and his hair is checked for lice by an American army medic. The great dictator, Saddam Hussein, captured, bedraggled, powerless. He knows the game of cat and mouse he played for 9 months on the run and a dozen years with the world are over for good. This was a moment for America's top man in Iraq to savour, his words a mixture of triumph and relief.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
They had trained for Operation Red Dawn for months, but it began yesterday morning with a tip-off from Kurdish fighters. The tip-off led them to the small town of Ad-Duar near Saddam Hussein's birthplace and former stronghold Tikrit. More than 600 troops, backed by attack helicopters with spy planes overhead, moved in on a small farm at around 8 o'clock last night. For half an hour they found nothing. Then they discovered a mud hut. Inside they found 2 men armed with AK-47 rifles. They gave up without a fight. Then the dramatic discovery. A hole in the ground camouflaged by bricks and dirt, 8 feet long, 6 feet deep. Inside they found an old bearded man with a pistol and $750,000 in cash. Saddam Hussein always said he'd save the last bullet for himself. He did not. He surrendered without a fight.
A court official's voice called for Saddam Hussein to be brought before the judge. He refused to stand, and the judge told the guards to lift him to his feet.
The court decided to sentence Saddam Hussein al-Majid to be hanged to death for his crimes against humanity.
Saddam's reaction was defiance. "Damn you and your court," he told the judge. "You are servants of the occupying forces. Long live the Iraqi nation." But in Shiite districts of Baghdad, the reaction to the death sentence was jubilation. Despite the curfew, some danced in the streets and the police celebrated. But in sunny areas there was anger. In Saddam's hometown Tikrit, demonstrators swore that they would support him to the end.
So in historical terms, it seems to me that this interview and the day you left Baghdad was literally the high water mark of Saddam Hussein. Pretty much everything went south for him thereafter. He lost the first Gulf War. He was then in power for more than a decade before the Second Gulf War, but he was on the back foot relatively between the two. And then, of course, we've just seen his end. And I guess one could argue many dictators' lives end that way, and they're always, you could make the philosophical case, they're always destined to overplay their hands and eventually come unstuck. When you look back on it all now, with all this history that's unfolded, and that day, that interview, at that critical juncture, what do you think when you reflect on it all now?
There is still a feeling of sadness about what may have been. Several years later, I went to Washington to do an interview with President Bush, and we got stuck on this point. After the fall of Saddam, and after the dramatic fall of the statue being pulled down in public, what was the broad point of the West's intervention? Was it just to end the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, or was that to try to engineer some permanent political change in that part of the Middle East? And in fact, I fell out with President Bush on that very question, who stopped the interview and said he would go no further. Because we were told that there was a possibility of the emergence of a different Middle East. Saddam represented one side of the religious divide. He supported the Sunnis, and that's what they were going to do. And there was an understanding in some parts of the world. I remember talking in Kuwait, in fact, to an Irish contingent of people who were there, who had been drawing on the experience of what happened in Northern Ireland as a way of trying to bring the different forces together, the different peoples together. And nothing like that happened. In fact, I was terribly struck the other day by reading that there's nobody today who calls himself an Arab or an Iraqi nationalist. The divisions are now more profound almost than ever. And so I wonder, I'm not sure, I don't know, I can't see into the future. I wonder whether a chance may have been missed about trying to change that outcome. Difficult, perhaps impossible. But I just wonder whether enough of a chance was made about changing that.
That's one of the great questions of history, and you're much too modest to say it, but I feel like there's been a lesson in this interview, not only for anyone who's interested in journalism, but for anyone who's interested in all walks of life, that persistence and tenacity, you know, going to Tottenham Court Road every day for however many days it was, without probably, honestly, much hope of success. But there's a lesson in there, I think, for all of us. So, Trevor, it's been an absolute honour to talk to you and a privilege, and thank you so much for giving us your time.
It's a great pleasure to review this and look at the pictures that I haven't seen for so long.
Okay, thank you very much. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit subscribe. And you can also listen to all of our episodes. Just search Reporting History on your usual podcast platform. Until next time, goodbye.